We have Thursday night football. It's the Titans versus the Packers. Let's take a look at some fantasy information, some DFS information for this game tonight. So Tennessee is 6-3. They are first in the AFC South. Green Bay is 4-6, second in the NFC North. I believe their overall matchup, wins and loss against each other, 7-6 in favor of Tennessee. Player spotlight, Ryan Tannehill. He's averaging 26 pass attempts, 193.1 passing yards, 7.4 yards per attempt, which is number 11 for quarterbacks, 13 fantasy points per game, 8 passing touchdowns, and 1 rushing. Green Bay gives up the 5th least fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. He's not a great play this week. Aaron Rodgers, on the other hand, is averaging per game 33.7 pass attempts, 231.5 passing yards, 15.2 fantasy points. He has 17 passing touchdowns for the year, which is number 5 for quarterbacks. Tennessee gives up the 5th most fantasy points per game on the year, so if you need to play Aaron Rodgers, he might be an okay option this week. He's just shown us some low fantasy point weeks, so his upside's not great. Player spotlight, Derrick Henry, number 2 in rushing yards with 923 for running backs, 102.6 per game. Number 3 in total touchdowns with 9. He's averaging 19.7 fantasy points per game with 5 weeks above that. Green Bay gives up the 15th most fantasy points per game, so they're right around in the middle for that. But Derrick Henry is a must-play every week. Player spotlight, Aaron Jones, number 6 in rushing yards, 738, 73.8 per game, 5 total touchdowns, which is number 15 for running backs, number 7 for running backs and receptions with 34, 3.4 per game. 15.9 fantasy points per game on the year with 4 weeks above that. Tennessee gives up the 9th least fantasy points per game, so not a great matchup, but this guy had 26 total touches last week. He's always a must-play as well. Risky play, but Treylon Burks, the rookie, came off of the IR last week and saw 6 targets. They made a huge investment in the draft for him with the 18th overall pick. We're waiting for his fantasy breakout game. 13.8 fantasy points per game for Allen Lazard with 4 games above that, 6.9 targets per game, 59 receiving yards per game, top 12 for wide receivers and deep and red zone targets. He has 5 touchdowns on the year. Tennessee gives up the 4th most fantasy points per game. Lazard's a good play. And knowing it's a good fantasy matchup, take a look at Christian Watson. He's had a quiet season. He's been a bit banged up, and in Week 10, he had 4 catches. He took 3 of those 4 catches for touchdowns, 32.7 fantasy points. He had a major breakout. Deeper leagues, you can look at Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, who had 8 targets and 2 touchdowns last week. Tight end streamer could be Robert Tonyan if you're in desperate need and want to chase a touchdown. Feel free to pause, but if you play on DraftKings and you want to bet on the anytime touchdown score, here are the odds right next to me here. Also on DraftKings, if you play the Showdown Captain mode, here are the prices if you want to build a lineup today, right here. If you want to bet on some player props, I love the Underdog Fantasy app. Use the promo code P2WFantasy for a deposit matchup up to $100. So much fun to play.